How do you justify any argument that says that the Nephites came from Israel and that their DNA still exists in the ancient Americas?
You have to be careful when you approach this question.
The anti-LDS analysis.
Controversies that some people have brought up in recent years.
What was the flaw in the conclusion that was being drawn by those who were trying to attack the church or the Book of Mormon?
If there were millions of people here at the time that Lehi arrived, then how do you measure the level of mixing?
The conclusion that plural marriage existed is not really in question. The question was, did Joseph Smith, did he have any offspring from anyone except Emma?
People are looking for signs that the Book of Mormon is true. I want to see a sign. I want to see evidence. Then I will believe it.
Evidence is given to those who already believe.
Exactly.
Welcome to the Chris Heimerdinger channel. Today we have a guest who is a professional scientist. He is a geneticist, and he is a Latter-day Saint. He is from Italy, and you're going to tell because of the accent, but he lives in the United States and has done tons of work for the church and for various ancestry companies. Ugo Perego, welcome to the Chris Heimerdinger channel.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I've known you for years, and we've spoken back and forth on different topics and such. One thing, there was a couple of topics that I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned that you had just released a book through Deseret Book.
That's correct.
On DNA and the Book of Mormon. Tell me a little bit about that.
So Deseret Book, a couple of years ago, started a new series called Let's Talk About It. I have a copy here. They all have the same little starting title, Let's Talk About It. And then they are basically addressing a number of more difficult topics that are related to Latter-day Saints teachings, history. For example, there is I can read you some of the titles actually that came out before, like Let's Talk About Polygamy, Religion and Mental Health, the Book of Abraham, the Law of Consecration, Faith and Intellect, and so on and so forth. I think one of my favorites is this one that came out last year, Science and Religion. Let's talk about science and religion. So the one that I co-wrote with my good friend John Butler, who is also a scientist. He is involved with the National Institute of Standard Technology and wrote a number of textbooks with regards to forensic DNA and the tools that we use actually in paternity testing, forensic DNA, genealogy, paternity. I don't know if I mentioned that. So he's kind of like the guru of that, and he's also happened to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it's a small booklet; it can be read easily in about a day or two, and addresses some of those controversies that some people have brought up in recent years. And as recent years, about now 20 years or so, that might have to do with whether we can use science to demonstrate the Book of Mormon to be an historical, real record.
Well, let's do a brief summary of what happened. I believe there was a member of the church in Australia who tried to put forth the argument that there was no DNA evidence that any ancient Americans living in the Western Hemisphere had any genetic connection to Hebrew, to the Jewish people of the Middle East.
That's correct.
He made that assumption based on what, and what was the flaw of even making that assumption?
I'm not going to go into the reasons why he took upon himself to do this crusade. There is a lot of information out there why or why not. If that was more objective science or subjective science, if there was some personal reasoning for why he needed the church not to be true anymore. Well, we're not going to go into that. But the argument is this. He's a geneticist. He's a plant geneticist, but he's a geneticist nonetheless. And some other researchers, not him, not his work, but other researchers basically have taken the DNA of different population and look at the relationships of the genetics of different group of people, and you can build these family trees where you can see which population is closely related to another population, which one is more distantly related, or if there is any connection at all. Also, it's important to remember as you do this thinking, this process, that there are different components of the human genome that you can take to do this approach. So not all DNA is alike. You can just say, oh, I use DNA. You have to say, okay, which DNA did you use? Was it the mitochondrial DNA? Was it the Y chromosome? Was it the autosomal DNA? Was it the X chromosome? Which population did you test or were tested by other scientists? Which conclusions did they draw upon that? What was the hypothesis that we were trying to test? So anyway, to make a long story short, it is my understanding that these conclusions that this man derived from other people publications were somewhat extrapolated and misinterpreted with regard to the Book of Mormon. And the story is very simple. There is a major migration the scientists agree with that took place at the end of the last ice age, from Siberia into what it is today, Alaska. That two pieces of land were connected. We're talking about
The Bering
Bering
Strait,
Strait.
right?
In fact, the scientists actually refer to that as a continent that has disappeared. Over 600,000 square miles that is no longer found, is now on the bottom of the sea. And that's because of the trapping of the water into ice, when the temperature were colder, which resulted in more land exposed. And then as temperature increased again, then the ice melt and more land is covered. So we kind of go through these cycles through the history of this planet. The last one, the last ice age, is the one that is particularly concerning the population of the American continent as we know it today, the origin of the Native Americans. And so that happened thousands of years before the Book of Mormon narratives.
Right.
So what this means is that you're now taking some data and some research and some publication that have had the main goal to understand the original migrations and the original expansions of modern day people like us, Homo sapiens, if you like, and when and how they came to the Americas, which predates the Book of Mormon by thousands of years. And now you're trying now to take the Book of Mormon narrative and trying somehow to fit it into this thing, which is actually much more recent and has some serious limitations. And so the attempt that I've been doing and other scientists have been doing, including this little booklet, is to help understand that you have to be careful when you approach this question with the DNA. And it's not that DNA doesn't work. DNA works when it's used within the proper context.
Let me give you my layman's understanding of what went wrong with the anti-LDS analysis. And that was that they were basing their conclusions upon mitochondrial DNA, which means DNA from the mother's side.
Originally, yes.
And they were suggesting that proved that there have been no Mesoamericans or no American settlers that we can discover from ancient history that had any relationship or any connection to the Hebrew or Jewish genotypes. I'm not quite sure.
Genotypes, yeah, sure. Or genetic signatures.
But you said to me years ago, you can't really measure mitochondrial DNA that many generations. You're only really accurate after about 4 generations.
No, that's autosomal DNA. That's the autosomal DNA. So mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome are two very specific small components, smaller compared to the whole genome. Okay, we're talking the whole genome of a human has 3.2 billion pieces of DNA. Y chromosome is 60 million. Mitochondrial DNA is less than 17,000. Okay, so we're talking about much smaller compared to the nuclear DNA. But you also need to consider that every two humans share about 99.9% of the DNA with any other humans. So what it comes down to is that there are several millions differences that distinguish one person from another person, both from our physical characteristics to a lot of other things like predispositions to diseases, our personality, and of course our origins, how we are connected to all the other people that are living on the planet now and that lived in the past. The one that would give us the most information but is limited by a time frame is what we refer to as autosomal DNA, which is chromosome pairs 1 to 22. We have 23 pairs of chromosomes in the human genome. 1 to 22, we refer to them as autosomal, and they are a combination, a random combination of our ancestors' DNA. To give you a point, if we go back 10 generations in time, you would have about 1,000 ancestors at that 10 generation, but only about 10% of them would have contributed to the DNA that you have today, to the autosomal DNA that you have today, which means that 90% of your ancestors are yours genealogically, but they have not contributed any DNA to who you are today.
So, in layman's terms, what was the flaw in the conclusion that was being drawn by those who were trying to attack the church or the Book of Mormon?
So mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome, and other markers usually have a changing rate. We call it a mutation rate that you need. It would be good to calibrate to pinpoint event that occur much longer ago in time, versus the Book of Mormon, which we need to remind people that we're talking about 2,600 years ago. That's where the narrative of the Book of Mormon starts, basically with Lehi in Jerusalem, 600 BC. Right? So question number one, would that be enough time to have genetic mutations that could be ascribed specifically to Lehi's group? Or you cannot tell people that came after Christopher Columbus from people that arrived right before Christopher Columbus, because the time frame is too short to make that distinction. So that's one of the problems right there. Another problem is do we know what markers are we looking for? Do we know how big was that population that first arrived? If they met any other people here, if they mix with those other people. So there are a lot of questions that we just don't know the answer. And we don't know the answer in order for us to construct a scenario where I would personally feel comfortable that we can design a scientific research that is sound and bulletproof. There are so many unknown variable in these whole things. So this is my simple very simple approach, without making any enemies, without telling people you're wrong. It's like, would somebody say, look, there is no DNA in the Americas that we can link to the people of Israel? Yes, you can say that, but you need to set a lot of variable that will make a fit for you into that preconceived idea, so that the Book of Mormon would not work. Let me give you an example. If the land of the Americas was completely empty, North, Central, and South America, pristine, completely empty, by 600 BC, and Lehi and his family were the first and sole colonizers, and every single Native Americans that was here when Europeans arrived has to be a direct descendant of Lehi, then maybe in that situation we are going to have a problem because we are not finding a very strong, whatever that could be, because we still don't know what that could be, but we are not finding that direct link with the ancient Near East. But if there were millions of people here at the time that Lehi arrived, then how do you measure the level of mixing? We call it a mixture, that took place between newcomers and old comers. I'm going to refer to your first book, Nephites, 10 Issues Among the Nephites, right? You got these people from Cody, Wyoming going to the land of the Nephite, and Jim, right? That's his name, Jim Hawkins.
Jim Hawkins, yes.
He falls in love with this girl, 12 years old, 13 years old. What's her name?
Yeah, but this is a very G-rated book, so it's like everybody went home. There was no mixing of chromosomes.
Yeah,
but anyway, your point.
That's what I'm pointing. Instead of coming through a cave, he would have come with a ship. Instead of coming from modern time to ancient time, he would have come in ancient time, and there would be all these people. Then could have, Jim Hawkins stay, or whatever is Lehi stay, and which he did, and then marry with local people.
Well, traditional belief, and I'm not sure how much the Book of Mormon confirms this, is that the Lamanites probably intermixed immediately. Yeah. But the Nephites did make some effort at keeping their race pure. Some effort. It wasn't successful because by the time of the Book of Jacob, we've got intermixing from, what was it? Nahor was his name.
Yeah.
He came in and nobody knew who he was. Here we are with still in the first generation.
Sherem was his name.
Sherem, that's right.
Yeah.
So when Sherem arrived among the Nephites, we're still in the first generation of the Book of Mormon, and yet nobody knew who he was, which would indicate he was neither Nephite nor Lamanite.
Yeah.
But he had been affected or influenced by the culture, the religious culture of the Nephites, and decided to make the declaration that Christ wasn't real and everything that Jacob was teaching was not true. So it's clear that the Nephites also intermixed very quickly with the local cultures.
Yeah, but and I'll give you 2 points about that. One of them is wherever there is the gospel truth, there is one of the very first things is missionary work. I think I have a different way to interpret a pure group or a pure race or whatever, because I would think that in the gospel will be people that have entered the covenant. Those will be the house of Israel, right? And so as long as you accept the gospel and accept the teaching of Christ and accept the commandments and you enter in a covenant, then there is no difference between you and the people abroad with me. We are one household. The Lord, many times you talk about it, there are no longer strangers, but we are one in the household of God. That will be expected anytime the truth is on the earth. Joseph Smith, first things he did, missionary work, sending his brother on a mission, even before the church was organized. So one of the things is that how quickly you meet somebody and you decide to share the good news with that person. Okay, number one. Number two, in 2 Nephi chapter 5, so we're not even talking about Jacob, we're talking about Nephi, is still alive. He lists very carefully and very details everyone that is going to follow him. He learns that his brother Laman and Lemuel wants to kill him. So he finds a need to separate him and the people that want to follow him from Laman and Lemuel. So he lists whoever is going to go with him. In 2 Nephi chapter 5, he lists everyone, sisters, brothers, their wife and everything. And then he adds this little clause at the end that says, and everyone else that wanted to come with me. And I'm like,
yes, and anyone who wanted to follow me. I don't remember the verse, but I'll put it up on the screen.
Yeah.
And that makes sense.
Left.
Yeah, if he's talking about a linear history of the Nephites, it would be common sense that he would first list the people that he knows and that
Yeah,
he's already discussed in the text, and then all those who would follow after me or follow with me. So he had successful missionary work. And we probably, if we still had the 116 pages, we would know
absolutely.
about this. They would
Yeah,
have told the story of missionary work that would have taken
yeah, I
place.
mentioned that in here.
Yeah, when Lehi first landed in the Americas, but that 116 pages is no more. So many Latter-day Saints traditionally have had the idea that when the Nephites arrived, there was nobody else here.
yeah,
But the Book of Mormon gives plenty of secondary evidence to indicate that no, Lehi was not alone. And of course, the archaeological record verifies that.
absolutely. We can't. We need to by if we think the Book of Mormon to be historical, we need by to rely number one on what the book says, whatever it is that survived that we have. Number one, what does the Book of Mormon says, and number two, what is the historical context of the Americas at that time, which come from archaeology and other disciplines. We as Latter-day Saints are not going to dismiss archaeological evidence just because it doesn't relate it to the Book of Mormon or it doesn't fit the Book of Mormon narrative. Brigham Young say we welcome any truth wherever they may come. So, if I know the Book of Mormon to be true, then there is going to be other information. There is going to be more information that is going to um, provide more context to those. I really like the work of Brother Brian Gardner. I don't know
Brant
if
Gardner?
are you familiar with him?
I know him well, yes.
So I like some of the more traditional uh, culture and the histories, the way the people behaved in ancient times in America, and I like to see how somehow these stories fit very well with the Book of Mormon narrative. I like one of my favorite book. It is right there, Understanding the Book of Mormon by Grant Hardy, and there is exposed the Book of Mormon or teaches the Book of Mormon from a
Literary point of view.
literary point of view, which I find it mesmerizing. That's just the places where somebody that is very interested in a serious study of the Book of Mormon should go to. The text, the context.
The context of the Book of Mormon is ingenious. It actually avoids culture as much as possible, which is great because that means it can be translated into any language, any other culture, and still be absorbed by that particular culture. So it is truly a piece of literature. I mean, if you even read the Bible, you have to be told, well, what does it mean to camel to go through the eye of the needle? What was the Israeli relationship with the Samaritans? You have to get educated on all of that in order to even understand many parts of the Old and New Testament. But the Book of Mormon, you can translate that into some obscure language in New Guinea, and the people are going, that was Mormon's
Yeah,
genius, was simplifying
that's
it
him.
like
That's
that.
him. He was he had an amazing gift in writing and in explaining. He's the type of guy, Mormon, that you do not want him to tell you a joke, because as soon as he tells you the joke, he will also explain it to you. You know, but that's how it is.
For the task at hand, that's what the Book of Mormon needed to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we appreciate that, but we also take very much for granted that those 116 pages that are missing cover 450 years of history,
Yes.
Nephite history, which is the beginning of the history. So, of course, you don't talk much about the culture of the Nephites, because by the time people like King Benjamin comes around and others, that is already established. That is not news. That is something that people lived every day. It would make a much more of a contrast. Oh, we do this, but they do that. Like in the first decades or so, or the first 100 years, we don't have that.
Well, a few minutes ago, you mentioned that based on current understanding scientifically with regard to DNA, you can draw the conclusion that there is no Israeli DNA amongst the ancient inhabitants of the Americas, but you have to make all kinds of assumptions in order to draw that conclusion.
Yes.
Can you make a similar set of assumptions and draw the opposite conclusion?
In what do you mean? Like that could be, but we are not seeing it.
In other words, yeah, the science could be argued the other way simply because we're in a learning process, we're in a development process with regard to DNA science. How do you justify any argument that says that the Nephites came from Israel and that their DNA still exists in the ancient Americas?
So the problem is that the group that came to the Americas that is described in the Book of Mormon is very homogeneous, which these are very closely related individuals with very little, expectedly so, very little genetic diversity. These are all parents, children.
The actual people on the ship.
On the ship, yeah. And then everything else, like, well, we have Laban, okay, then maybe we have some Jaredite, so we have the people of Zedekiah, with Mulek. So, but as you see, as you bring more and more individual into the picture, you add in more and more variables that you cannot control. So the question that I would ask, number one, is if you go to Israel today, or if you go to Israel 2,600 years ago, you will not find a very homogeneous population. In fact, there is this statement in the study of population genetics that blew my mind the first time I heard it when I started studying these things, and it took me a couple of days to fully grasp what it meant, which states that we are more different within the same population than we are between different populations. In other words, Israeli, Palestinians, African, Italian, French are more similar to each other than Italians are among Italians.
Well, that sounds like drawing any conclusions with regard to DNA in the Book of Mormon is a flight of fancy. It's not even something that can be tested, or there's no hypothesis which can be reasonably concluded to be true whatsoever.
And let me explain to you why so. The reason is that scientists base their finding and their conclusion on probabilities and statistics. They often use what they refer to as frequencies. So can I find the marker? Let's call this marker A. All right, I'm gonna find this marker A among the German, the Italians, the African, and the Israelites. All right, all of them have it. Okay, so they're similar because they all have it. But the Israeli might have 70% of the population that have that marker, while the Italian have 10% of that. Right. So what it means now that a particular marker becomes more typical of a population, but not exclusively unique to that population. It's not a proprietary marker. So what scientists have been trying to do, how specific can I go in identifying, they call them AIM, AIM, ancestor, what do you call it, informative marker, ancestry informative marker, AIM, which can be associated with one population and one population only. And are they exclusive? Are they providing the full picture? No, they're not. They're just providing a direction, an indication, some sort of a picture. So I might find some aims that are unique to the Native American populations. But does that mean because I don't find them in other populations that they never been in those other populations, or they have not disappeared? Are they unique enough that I can link them to a specific population and show the origin? I've worked on papers in the past, some scientific papers. In one situation was where certain markers that were not we just didn't know what they were dismissed. Okay, so you have a whole data set of markers, of informative markers, and just because we couldn't figure out what they were, we just didn't include them in the study. We arbitrarily decide this doesn't work. Okay, we don't know what they are, and then later on, further research, better technology, deeper analysis has shown, oh, that's what it was. So the original paper excluded them, and then eventually they were brought back into the picture because we have better tools to analyze that. So things like that happen all the time. How many times have we found something in the Americas among Native American groups that looks way too Europeans, and automatically we dismiss that because it's like, oh, the only explanation, this has arrived after the Europeans came in 1492.
Are you saying that there may be evidence of an intermingling of the Israeli genotype or DNA in the Americas from about the 600 BC period that might have been discovered, but that scientists have ignored because it just didn't fit into the right box?
That's kind of like the default. It's not the only reason, but it is being I have evidence that has happened, personal experience, papers that I have looked for my research, that if it doesn't fit the mold, you just put it aside, or you give them a very quick explanation and say, okay, if this looks European, it has to be European. And if when I say European, I'm talking about the old world, like could be Jews, could be Africans, okay.
Right.
If this looks like it comes from those other countries, then it has to be something that came in more recent times. And the problem is, Book of Mormon is 2,600 years ago migration. That's the story, which is too close in time to be able. Let's say this is right here is my timeline, right? This is 1492 right here, okay? And here I have 1491, and here I have 1493, okay? So how do I know when if something came before the official arrival of the Europeans or after? And you can move that several hundred years. For example, we know that the Vikings lived in Greenland and had exchanges with the natives for over 400 years, and yet we have not been able to find any sort of genetic mixing among the Native Americans or among the Northern Europeans to an extent that we can say, oh, this happened. We're talking about 1000 AD to 1400 AD.
Is that because the science is still trying to catch up? In other words, do you perceive that there's going to be advancements that's going to make those kinds of conclusions easier in the future? Are you talking about just the current state of the science?
I'm gonna be more conservative and say it is this way. First of all, this is important. It's sad, but it's important, and it is. Let's look at from the critics of the Book of Mormon point of view. All right, would there be any sort of evidence that will come forth in the future that will be considered satisfactory to answer that question?
Okay, that's a trick question because for an anti-Latter-day Saint, there will never be enough
Okay,
evidence.
now, and why? Because you can always find a reason to justify and explain anything that will support genetic evidence for the Book of Mormon. And I'm okay with that. It's true because scientists provide multiple explanations or interpretations to the data, which is a key concept in publication in science, is that you always leave a door open for further interpretation, for further studies. It's nothing is ever absolutely conclusive. All right. So if somebody will tell you DNA is what did they refer to? They call it the nail, they seal the coffin. Is that what it is? Did you ever hear that?
Oh, a nail that sealed the coffin that the Book of Mormon is not true is DNA evidence?
The last nail is the DNA evidence, right? That shows that the Book of Mormon is not true. You can't make that statement because you already tells me a lot about yourself. If you're saying that that is the last evidence, that there is not going to be any way to dismantle that, to argue with that, to interpret it in any other way, then the conversation is already closed. But on the other hand, you're also showing to me you're not a very good scientist, because that's not what science does. Science always leave a door open.
That's what I understood. It was that science, it's not just among believers or non-believers in the Latter-day Saint theology. If any scientist comes forth with really dogmatic ideas about the way things definitely were, they are going to open themselves up to some problems later in their career, or at least with future generations.
And I'm the first one to come forth and say, I don't have all the answers. We don't have all the data. But I have talked with people that are a lot smarter than I am, people that have been publishing hundreds of papers on population genetics. And I asked them this question. I just told them, it's like, would it be possible to find evidence of a small group of migrants that came 2,600 years ago in America with already millions of people here? And they look at me like I'm crazy, like how the answer is like, how would you expect to design such a project,
So the question itself is impossible to answer based upon what we have to study the issue right now.
Yeah. And again, because we don't know a lot of things. We don't know the extent of a mixture. We don't know if there were any Jaredites. We don't know where they came from. We don't know the genetic markers that they brought. I mean, there is a tremendous amount of the list of unknown, and you're trying to build a very conclusive study. If I may add, you're trying to determine if it's the Word of God or not the Word of God, or your salvation or your relationship with God, based on a study that honestly cannot be built. Would you be willing yourself to put all of that at risk?
That is so refreshing to hear from a scientist, because a lot of scientists, maybe it was a paradigm of the last generation, but there was a need that scientists felt to dogmatically declare certain truths, certain paradigms about how they viewed the universe.
Yeah.
And for example, the paradigm associated with DNA was that the whole population of the world could be taken back to the pre-Homo sapiens species from Africa.
Yeah.
That we could say that the whole world was populated by Africa. But I did see a blurb the other day that said, I don't know if even that presumption is all that strong.
Well, there is a book that came out from BYU Life Science. It's called The Restored Gospel of Jesus Christ and Evolution. I'm one of the editors on this book, together with a few other people, and it's a collection of essays. And it's not trying to support the evolution through the gospel, but it's trying to kind of help see that there are a lot of things where this topic can be, we can have a dialogue. You can be, there could be reconciliation, with some of the science and some of the more dogmatic points of doctrine or teachings. And also is a reminder of how much is tradition versus how much is revelation, and how much is the Lord actually told us and revealed in the scriptures versus how much we think he did.
Interesting.
So
the genetic argument obviously is a pretty foggy one, if you want to use that to prove or disprove somebody's faith. One thing I know that you were also involved in, which is very interesting to me, for a couple generations, there was the strong assumption that was made in the church that Joseph Smith produced many children from his polygamous wives. You were able to do a study, I think, that disputed almost every possibility. There is no evidence that any of Joseph Smith's polygamous marriages, relationships, whatever, however you want to term it, that any of them ever produced children, which is pretty incredible.
First of all, I'm not trying to explain or prove anything with regards to the practice of plural marriage. That is something that I'm leaving to historian, theologians, scholars of the church.
Right. The conclusion that plural marriage existed is not really in question. The question was, did Joseph Smith have any did he have any offspring?
Yeah, so let's make this clear. As a biologist and a scientist, you don't need to have children to have a physical relationship with somebody. Okay.
But in the 1800s, there wasn't much safe sex practices taking place.
And well, although John C. Bennett came up with some pretty interesting things.
Dr. John C. Bennett, yes.
So anyway, my point is that again, some people, and I'm not able to answer the question, are wondering to what extent Joseph Smith practiced plural marriage, and what was the doctrinal motivation behind it. Why did he do that? And so there are many different reasons. Oh, he did it because of this and that and that and that. And one of the reasons is, he was a lustful man, or because he wanted to have a large posterity. Okay, so I can address the large posterity one, because Joseph Smith had 9 biological children from Emma, plus 2 that he adopted. One of them died in the infamous Iron Page, the Johnson's farm, when...
Right, I remember, yes.
So anyway, we know he was fertile and he could have children because he had several with Emma. However, all the children that have documented to be his 2 plural unions, every single one that could be tested turned out to be negative. Now, there is another things to consider. Not every single case can be tested. For example, if there was a baby,
there's one who died who left no progeny,
childbirth, or after a couple of weeks, and we don't know where it's buried, and so on, then there is no way to know that. Also, there are people that I have met that say, "Oh, I had a dream where Joseph Smith came to me and say I'm his descendant. Can you do a DNA test to prove that?" And just keep that to yourself, is special to you, but I don't think we need to do. But if there are like records made, journal entries, document statements, where this became quite a, it seems like there is quite a bit of evidence, historical circumstances, in which this could have happened, then I was very happy to try to do that.
Explain what you did do for the church, I guess, just for science.
So I didn't do that for church or for science. I did that for myself. And actually, to be even more honest, I did that for a few people that were very concerned with the family history with their tree. So this would be individuals that would call me and say, I'm doing my family history research, my genealogy, and I arrive at a point in my tree where I don't know if I should follow Joseph Smith line or Parley P. Pratt line, who am I descending from, and that's a legitimate question. It is your tree and you want to know who is your ancestor. So it wasn't something sensational. It was just family history. That's how the whole thing started. There are some cases like Josephine Lyon that were more intriguing than others, because with the case of Josephine Lyon, her mother, Sylvia Session, left an affidavit on her deathbed stating that to her daughter that she was the daughter of Joseph Smith. So, that makes her like, wow, that's interesting. You have a mother. She would have known, who the child is, right?
What was your conclusions testing that particular case?
She wasn't biologically, but in the whole process, and it's this was actually published in a forensic journal, so it went through, it wasn't like a history, something specifically to Western history, Mormonism, this was like a forensic journal, a scientific forensic journal that went through peer review process. So the science is there is sound, and it's not. So now you need to start taking a step back and look at like what did she mean maybe with you are the daughter of Joseph Smith, and that takes into consideration things that are beyond the words.
Beyond the words, yes.
Beyond the words, right? So like you start looking at the cultures and tradition and scriptural teachings. You're familiar with the Levirate marriage. You know that if in the
The what
ancient
marriage?
Levirate marriage in the
Levirate.
law of Moses, if I die and I don't have any children with my wife, my next in kin, my brother, will need to marry her and have children with her, and those children will be mine in eternity.
Interesting.
Okay, that is the whole things between Jesus and the Sadducees in Matthew, I believe it's Matthew 22, where there was this woman married to 7 men, and then they ask her in the eternity who she's gonna be with, and there is a whole manipulation there to trying to
Right. There was a manipulation, so Jesus appeared to have punted the question.
Yeah, and he actually answered these things. It's like, guys, you don't understand the scriptures, nor the prophets, or the law, or whatever. So he's telling you, like, you're telling me a story, but you don't understand it. You don't understand the basic of it.
Yeah, there is no marriage in the eternities. It's a mortal thing, but it has ramifications in the eternities.
Well, there is even a bigger story, which I find it very fascinating. This whole story that the Sadducees are telling Jesus is found in the scriptures. It's found in a book that the Catholics use in their Old Testament. Is an apocrypha book, apocrypha volume, and is the book of Susan, if I remember correctly. No, Tobias, the book of Tobias, which tells the story of this woman married to 7 men. But the end of the story, she married an 8th man, and the 8th man is the son of the prophet, and she married him under the duly authority of the priesthood. So the story is true. None of the 7 previous men will have her, because none of them marry her with the proper authority. Only the 8th man, which is not mentioned by the Sadducees, will have her in eternity. So anyway, there is a whole story that taps into scriptures that is a much bigger. We're taking a digression here.
Well, that's okay. That's a pretty interesting digression. But going back to Joseph Smith's progeny, it is fascinating that if we, as anti-Latter-day Saints, believe that this was all something that was concocted by Joseph Smith because he was just a very lustful, couldn't control himself kind of a guy.
Yeah.
It's fascinating that in an era where there was very little safe sex practiced, that he had no progeny from anyone except Emma.
Yeah, and again, I think we tend to do what's called presentism. We tend to trying to understand 1800s, 19th century culture with 21st century traditions, which is where we live in.
Presentism.
Yeah, presentism. So I think the problem we have is that nowadays we emphasize the temple union between a man and a woman as the culmination of a sealing power or a sealing ordinance. Back in Joseph Smith day was more of a community thing, was an extended family thing, was the whole church being sealed to God.
What you mean is it wasn't necessarily or possibly at all a sexual thing.
There could have been in some circumstances. I'm not denying excluding that at all, but I think the emphasis is different.
The emphasis was different. People were sealing to ancestors as late as Wilford Woodruff's presidency in the church, and then that practice ended in the early 1900s, or late 1800s. But it had a different meaning. It had nothing to do with lust, conjugal. I mean, nothing of that nature. It had to do with community, society, and it had to do with thoughts of the eternities, not of mortality.
I'll give you an example. When I was doing all that research, one of the cases that I was working on, one of the case studies had to do with Parley P. Pratt's second wife. Her name was Mary Ann Frost, and he had a number of children from her, including a guy named Moroni Pratt, and he was born in December 1844, which would have made Joseph Smith a candidate because he died in June 1844, so she could have been pregnant with Joseph Smith before he was killed. All right.
Right.
So why do we say that? Well, because we have records that Mary Ann Frost, although she was married for a time to Parley P. Pratt, second wife, she was actually sealed to Joseph Smith. She was one of the first sisters that received the endowment in the red brick store. I found in my research a note from a transcription from a note from Parley P. Pratt, where it was essentially stating that every child he would have with Mary Ann Frost would have been Joseph in the eternity. So he's having them.
Oh, that explains the conversation with the daughter.
Yeah. And the Levirate marriage, because we call each other brothers and sisters in the church, right?
Right. And today there's a different obsession, and it has to do with intimacy. Whereas back then, that word would have had a totally different meaning in the time and in the context.
And according to the Mosaic law, if I die and I don't have any children with my wife, my brother has to take her and have children with her, regardless if he's already married. So that's further evidence that plural marriage as a way to structure society in this life and in the next life, because all the children that my brother would have with my wife, with my widow wife, would be mine in the eternity, which teaches, number one, there was polygamy in the Old Testament, plural marriage in the Old Testament. Number two, there was an understanding the families are eternal.
That families are eternal in the Old Testament. That understanding is prevalent. So when Jesus was asked that question, it was the clear response was, you just don't understand the doctrine in the first place, so you shouldn't even be asking this question, because any answer I give you doesn't make sense without me explaining.
And the Sadducees didn't believe in resurrection, so why would you even talk to them about eternity? And
Excellent point. Yeah.
so anyhow, well, there is a lot that needs to be taken into consideration. But as far as we know, all the cases that could be tested, and I'm talking about 7, 8 cases, are all tested negative.
Well, the one that the study that I read, there's only one or two that never produced progeny. They're in the grave. You can't disturb the grave. You weren't given permission to dig up the remains to do any DNA testing. There is hardly anyone left who could even possibly be progeny of Joseph Smith.
Yeah, all the research that I did, I've never disturbed anyone in the grave. Everything I done was collecting markers that have survived generation after generation.
That still have, that went on and had children and grandchildren and great grandchildren.
So among living descendants of the interested party.
I can only think of one case that you haven't been able to investigate because you're not willing to dig up someone's grave.
I made like a number of years ago. I published an article in a book about polygamy. It's called "The Persistence of Polygamy." That's the name of the book, "The Persistence of Polygamy," and I put a table in there where, and I don't mean that table to be a comprehensive table at all, but those are all the possible cases that I've been able to find through history, diary, documents that would link a child and a woman to Joseph Smith. Of those, on that list, I've been able to test a number of them, but for obvious reason, there will never be. That list is not comprehensive because, first of all, we don't know. Remember, during Joseph Smith days, that was kept quite, there was quite some secrecy around it for a number of reasons.
Right. What was it, 1851 or 2, where it went public and the church admitted it
Yeah.
existed? 1832, I think Joseph Smith received the revelation that plural marriage was authorized, was okay to do.
It was published in 1873.
But it was, yes, for many decades it was not published, which of course has been, it made it necessary for a lot of researchers to really scratch their brains and pull out their hair over the last 50 years to try and put together a picture. And the picture has been strongly influenced by presentism,
Yeah.
which is the idea that men are just basically lustful creatures. And
Unfortunately, those we are trying to prosecute are now here to be
nope,
interrogated.
and we have that problem a lot. What it brings us back to is, if you want to get a testimony of this religion, it's there, it's available, you can seek it, you can receive it. If you want to prove that the church is not true, there's a lot of information at your hands that you can prove that case too.
As well.
It's
Yeah,
a spiritual question. And
absolutely.
if you want to cast it into a secular category, then you're doing everything that's antithetical to the whole religion of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's not a secular pursuit. It is an eternal pursuit. And before you jump in, you better have a testimony from a stronger source than a DNA analysis.
Absolutely. So nothing wrong with looking at these things. You just have to be careful how strong of a conclusion you want to make out of it.
Well, okay, we can talk about this subject a little bit. We've both had run-ins with the Heartlanders, those who want to basically assert the idea that the Book of Mormon took place in the Great Lakes region or within the continental United States.
Yeah.
And they tried to use DNA as a major argument to prove that that case was true. And I know that you were approached to try and verify, provide internal evidence that might support their case. What's your conclusion of that whole situation today?
So I was approached many years ago, mostly to endorse that. To endorse, they were not interested in my research. They wanted me to endorse their idea.
Did they offer you some kind of compensation, monetary or otherwise, for endorsing their project?
No, they never did that. They never offered that. But very, very early, when they were a very small movement before the whole conferences and everything, I was approached and I was asked in my office. I met with Rod Meldrum, and I was asked about what I thought about the whole X2 mitochondrial DNA X2 haplogroup as a possible connection between Old World people and Native Americans, and as some sort of evidence, genetic evidence, that would support the existence of Book of Mormon people. And interestingly, Chris, I have done probably more research independently from Book of Mormon. This has just been, I want to say coincidental, although I don't believe in coincidences. That was what my mentor in my PhD program chose for me, Professor Torroni, to study in particular that haplogroup, the X2a haplogroup among Native American, because it is an intriguing haplogroup, all right? It is an interesting
Which is
haplogroup.
found primarily among the Iroquois and
It's found all over North America. It's not only found in the Great Lakes areas, but it's found also all the way in North America from coast to coast. Okay.
in Mexico?
No. North America, as in north, we refer to it as northern North America. That would be basically North United States, South Canada, kind of like along the border. Right.
I understand.
Okay, so we will go all the way from the state of Washington and all the way to the Great Lakes area. You will find them. We found the X2A among Navajos, There are also some X2a that have been found in Alaska, in northern part. There are X2a found in Florida, which is a little bit south along that coast, the coastline. So there have been different individuals that have carried that particular haplogroup. It is intriguing. It's very rare. It is found at a very low frequencies in North America, and it is also found not that particular one, not the Native American one, but other branches of that particular haplogroup with their own characteristics, but related to that particular X2a. They call it X2b, X2c, X2e, right? The X2a is only found in North America. The X2c, X2b, X2ef, and so on are found in Asia and in the Middle East. And in Northern Africa, there are some other X's as well. So it is a very, very rare, and yet you find it a little bit everywhere,
Well, then, with that particular haplogroup, how did the Heartlander movement feel that there might be a connection with Israel and the Great Lakes, or Israel and the continental United States?
Well, there are some scientific publication. Again, the sample size is very small, so statistically, it's very hard to draw conclusion when you have a very small sample size. And so what they are pushing that the evidence is stronger than what it is, and they're saying that because we found related haplogroups to that, similar, not the exact one, but similar haplogroups in the Middle East, that is what Lehigh carried to the Americas, and that's why we found that in the Great Lakes area. So they're making a little bit of an overstretch connection between Old World X2a haplogroups, which include a lot of different branches of X2, except X2a. There is no X2a in the Old World, and then there is an X2a in the Americas, which is not found anywhere else. So let's talk about let's look at it as a pedigree chart. Like, let's say there is a grandfather, right, or a great grandfather that lives somewhere in Europe, and he has great grandkids. And one family, one branch of those great grandkids comes to the America, and all the other ones stay back in the Old World. All right. So that's kind of like how it works. The great grandfather will be X, and then he would have children called X2, X1, X2, and then those children would have their own children called X2a, X2b, X2c, X2. The way that it works in genetics is that you name haplogroups using an alternation of letters and numbers. So X, X2, X2a, X2ab, X2b, X2c, X2d. Does that make sense? You keep adding as the branch becomes finer and finer and finer. All right, you're kind of going down that way. I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
Well, trying to defend that concept among the Heartlander crowd, what would be the evidence is there anything that they can hang their hat on?
It is all a matter, at this point, it is a matter of making assumptions to fill in the gaps, okay? So we use a couple things. We use, number one, we use a specific mutation in science, in population genetics. We use specific mutations, okay? Specific genetic characteristics that create some sort of, help us classify or group these little branches, okay? So if you have that particular mutation, then you belong to this branch. If you don't, and you have another mutation, then you belong to this other branch, okay? That's what we use in genetics. And then we use another things on the top of that, which is called the molecular clock or mutation rate. How often does the DNA changes? How often can we expect such mutation to occur? And that's a big guesstimate as well. It can be a mutation can happen between a father and a son, or a mother and a daughter, and then nothing would happen for 5,000 years. So the target is moving. Is a very is not black and white. There is a lot of things that you have to consider. So here is the thing. They are saying that the fact that we see X2a in the America is directly connected to a migration that happened 2,600 years ago, as described in the Book of Mormon, from people that came from the Middle East and carried that particular mutation with them, that particular haplogroup. The reality is a huge stretch, okay? In fact, there is actually, based on what I told you, based on the molecular clock, based on the mutation rate, based on the type of mutation that we observe, we can say that both the old world X groups, okay, the subgroups, and the new world X groups have a common ancestor, probably back 35,000 years ago, somewhere in Europe.
Oh goodness, 35,000 years.
Yeah, so
not 2,600 years.
2,600 years. And that they are distant cousin to each other, meaning that the one in the America is not descendant of the one in the Middle East, and the one in the Middle East is not descendant, but they're both coming down from the common ancestor, and one is here and one is there, and they are different enough that they cannot be brought together at this point. We don't have any, we need to have more samples that will show some intermediate connection, which we don't have.
Oh my goodness.
The one that is kind of creating a little bit more of a fuss is the sample that was found, it's called the Kennewick man. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
Yeah, I've heard of Kennewick man.
Yeah, so that's also another matter of debate. There have been a couple of scientific studies done on him. He's actually an X2a as well. Is found on the
West Coast.
On the West Coast, right there, right under the what we call it, the Pacific coastline pathway. That is what we think. That's where the first Native American came.
Right,
from
Bering Strait.
Bering Strait down along the coastline, and so the timing is right. The geographic location is correct. He does not have any what we call them private mutation, meaning he's kind of like the very, very. I'm making a very gross generalization here, but it almost looks like he's one of the very first of X2a coming to America, and everyone else that we have kind of came from that group.
But even Kennewick man predates Book of Mormon, Jaredites, Nephites, everything.
Yeah.
So the story of this continent and human population is so incomplete.
Yes.
Not even the Book of Mormon gives us a complete picture of exactly how it all transpired and came about.
Yeah.
Which makes sense because we're taught that the city of Enoch was here on the American continent. We're taught that the Garden of Eden was here on the American continent. So when it all became centered in Europe and the Tower of Babel, we just have no idea. Science right now can't help us draw any conclusions.
Yeah, and that's outside of my sphere of expertise. All I can tell you is, DNA data that I have personally collected, I have personally analyzed, and I have personally published, including probably the largest number of X2a samples among Native Americans. That has been big part of my work. And as far as I can tell today, I don't think that's enough genetic evidence to be used in support of the Book of Mormon. It is, and I'm going to tell you that with all, the simplicity and the honesty of my heart, from a scientist, from a believer. It is a nice idea. It is a nice idea. However,
what is a nice idea? Let's make sure the audience is following.
Okay, so it is a nice idea to entertain the thought that the Book of Mormon geography may have taken place in North America, right? And to be honest, I am not an expert in some of the archaeology or climatology or other type of evidence that they are using to support that claim. Okay, so I'm not going to go in there. However, their genetic claims, their DNA claims that the DNA is supporting a North American settlement of Book of Mormon migrants is extremely poor, and it is extremely dangerous to put a lot of
Credence?
yeah, to believe in that and take that as this is like gold, like set in stone. President Hinckley many years ago say, there is so much we don't know. And that goes on both ways. It goes with the critics and goes with those that desperately want more man-made evidence to support the Book of Mormon, which unfortunately is going to have its down. What's the word? Downside to it, because when you put too much trust in the arm of man, you're going to be disappointed at some point. Science changes.
It does change.
Right. So my personal feelings, after all, is this one: is that genetics is a great tool to answer many questions, paternity testing, forensic investigation, even a general idea of how people migrated in ancient times, how the whole world have been colonized, and the expansion routes that have been taken. But as we go back in time, based on the number of samples that are available to us, most of that becomes, I don't want to say guesswork, but, like your best guess, right? So there is a lot that we don't know, a lot that we might never know, many more samples that need to be collected, many more samples that might not be available to be collected because, again, we cannot test every single person that ever lived.
So generally, even the whole concept of proving the Book of Mormon is true through the science of genetics is guesswork and uncertain, pro or con.
And unfortunately, what we're dealing with, which is the same in many other fields, is that people kind of have their own preconceived notions, and they are looking desperately for data to support what they already think is true, regardless if they're in favor or against the Book of Mormon. That is how they read, and they dismiss everything else and any other possibility. And again, we spoke about this in this interview, where it says when somebody comes to you and it says this is a definitive answer, there is no other way to interpret this. This is the conclusion. There is nothing else that can be done. It is, DNA is either proving the Book of Mormon to be true or not to be true. When somebody comes in that strong on you, then you know that you need to be careful and take what they're saying with a grain of salt, because there is no one in science, in any field, medicine, pharmaceutical, forensic, there is hardly no one that says this is 100% the case. They say this is what the evidence, the data is showing, but we might have been overlooked something, or that we could be disproven when more data is analyzed. This is the best that we can come up with at this time, and we're gonna leave time to tell us differently.
The best that we can come up with does still generally state that the Americas were populated by peoples coming across the Bering Strait.
Yeah, and we're also seeing that there were other migrations that took place. That was the major first migration we referred to, but there could be a lot of other minor migrations that kind of flew under the radar, and we just don't know anything about it. There are some migration that took place from northern Russia all the way across the North Pole, and they came all the way to northern Canada, not following the Bering Strait. That happened about 5,000 years ago. We have some evidence of that.
Well, when we talk 5,000 years, we're getting closer to the Jaredite record, but that doesn't talk about a ship. And we don't even know where the Jaredites started. Let's assume they started in Mesopotamia, because that's the assumption about the Tower of Babel. There's no evidence that a group came over directly by ship from Mesopotamia as yet.
But the Book of Mormon doesn't tell us any demographic information about the Jaredites. Like we are playing around Lehi and his family because they're saying they belong to the tribe of Ephraim, to the tribe of Manasseh. And so there is a connection to Israel, and people say Israel equal Palestine, equal that part of the world. And so let's go and look for that DNA there. Let's look for that DNA here in the America. Let's see if we can find a connection. With the Jaredites, we don't know what ethnic, we call it biogeographical ethnicity they have. We don't know where they came from. We don't know what genetic group they belong to. We don't know what ethnicity they had. How do you find a Jaredite DNA when you don't even know what a Jaredite is?
Well, you're discouraging me from using DNA to prove anything one way or another, which would probably be the point.
Exactly.
You don't want to prove the Book of Mormon using modern science. You need to use the Spirit of God. You need to use faith in order to be able to understand these issues. Science is fun because it can sometimes support, back up, but what you seem to suggest is that DNA is not even there, where you could use it to support or back up any particular agenda, theory, or idea about the Book of Mormon and its origins.
I would be very wary to bet my eternal destiny on genetic evidence, just because and again, in the book that I wrote an article and for a book for Daniel Peterson with Michael Ash, and then in the book that we just wrote with Desert Book, I mentioned that the DNA is a key that can unlock many doors, but not all the doors. And definitely, the Book of Mormon is not. It does not have the keyhole for the DNA to conclusively prove it to be true or not to be true. All right, I would not bet my salvation, my relationship with God, on the fact that DNA may or may not be able to support or attack the Book of Mormon. There are other ways to approach the Book of Mormon. If you're desperately looking for some man-made evidence, you can look at the literary style. You can look at the geography of the Book of Mormon. You can look for anachronism, whether or not or Joseph Smith got them right over time. And you can look at archaeology. There are a lot of things that can help you understand whether the Book of Mormon is we're looking at the question, Chris, is the historicity of the Book of Mormon, right? Is the Book of Mormon
Correct.
a book that tells us a history of real people, real places, or is a 19th century fictional religious book? That's the big question, right? And I don't think DNA is the appropriate tool to answer that question.
So, what is your formula? What's your personal formula for believing the Book of Mormon is true?
Well, my suggestion with everybody, even those that are having a faith crisis, is go back from the beginning. Just like missionaries do. Let's start with God the Father and Jesus Christ. Let's start there. Where is your relationship with them? Where do you believe they exist? Do you believe they care about you? Do you believe Christ is your Savior? Do you believe Heavenly Father is involved in your life and cares about you, and there is a plan for you? Let's start right there. And if you believe in that connection, and if you believe that like Elder Kiron said recently that God is what did he use? Relentlessly.
God is in relentless pursuit of you.
He is there for you, right? Let's start right there. That is a personal spiritual journey that everybody has to start. And then based on that, let's see what else there is from it. Can God answer a question about the Book of Mormon being true? Just like Moroni say. Well, put it to test. Let's see it. Study, read it, put it, ponder it, and go from it. I don't think you should dwell and throw away, they say throw away the baby with the bath water. Is that what they say, right?
That is the American saying,
yeah,
yes.
that's what I say.
It's a cart before the horse kind of question.
Yeah.
You want to get into some of these scientific and research kind of studies, have a testimony of the Book of Mormon, have a testimony of the church itself before, and then you can explore questions. You can do whatever you'd like. Exercising the brain and studying from the best books seems to be an injunction placed upon Latter-day Saints. But if your goal is to try and gain a solid testimony using secular science or using other approaches, I suppose these things can assist. I don't want to put a hard label on anybody's testimony. You gain a testimony however you gain a testimony. Maybe you do it through studying the archaeology of the Book of Mormon. But I would say that a much safer course for me, and I'll just speak personally, I gained a testimony of the Book of Mormon before I ever even heard about where the Book of Mormon might have taken place. And I thought that cart before the horse kind of thing worked out for me.
Yeah, and again, the church has made it really clear that we can believe that location to be wherever we want it to be, as long as we don't impose those teachings on others.
Impose, that's the term. In other words, you don't dogmatically assert that if you don't believe the way that I believe, you cannot be a real Latter-day Saint. You can't be a true, believing, faithful person.
Yeah,
and that
that's where I
distinction
draw
is
the
really
line.
important.
That's where I draw the line, because at the end, even if it turns out to be that that's where the Book of Mormon took place, it's gonna
Great.
be an accidental surprise, in a way that the evidence that we have today with any of the sites is just provisional evidence. You don't have the full picture. We don't have a lot of the things that we need to draw conclusively, where that took place.
Well, it's amazing that for years and years we had the conclusion that the Book of Mormon was not true because it says there's horses, and we know that North America, this whole Western Hemisphere had no horses. Now, all kinds of evidence, not all kinds, but there are
A
definitely
lot of them.
very hardcore science studies that indicate there were horses pre-Columbian, before Columbus arrived in the New World.
Well, and there is also a lot of evidence, cement and grains and other things that there was absolutely no way that Joseph Smith would have known when he translated the Book of Mormon, which make me feel like, okay, what about taking a minute and looking at every single thing he was right about, instead of like focusing on the list of where he was wrong about it, which list is becoming shorter and shorter and shorter over time, and that is a demonstration that there is really no man-made evidence that can change somebody's heart one way or the other. It is all about your relationship with the Savior. It's all about your relationship with your Father in heaven and the people in your family, in your congregation. That's where you need to focus on.
Well, let that be the theme. That's a great place to end the podcast. Just the idea that science can be exciting, it can be interesting, it can exercise your brain muscles, build synapses, things that will be important in the eternities. But when it comes to trying to find out if this is the true Church of Jesus Christ on the face of the earth, you better rely on something a little deeper than that.
And I would even take that step further. It's like, don't even be concerned yet with the truthfulness of the church. Start with the truthfulness that there is a God in heaven, that is your Father, that He loves you. Start with realizing that there was a Christ, that He died for your sins. And once you have the assurance, and then you can explore Joseph Smith, you can explore the church, you can explore the additional scriptures that we have. Problem is that people that sometimes leave the church, they tend to throw away everything. Not just that have to do with the restoration, but the whole divinity, and that's what I'm mostly concerned with.
No, I agree. The core questions that I faced as a missionary, the biggest obstacle I faced was somebody who didn't believe in God at all. Somebody who didn't have any acceptance, understanding, or testimony of Jesus Christ. It's like at that point, where do you have to go back even further than talking about Joseph Smith, talking about the Book of Mormon? Doesn't work. You have to start at a core understanding that takes you to deeper questions than even whether there's a true church on the face of the earth. Is there a God who loves me?
People are looking for signs that the Book of Mormon is true. I want to see a sign. I want to see evidence. Then I will believe it.
Evidence is given to those who already believe.
Exactly.
That is an interesting equation. People want to turn that around all the time.
Yeah. It's easier. It takes away responsibility from you. But the fact is, and again, like I mentioned that earlier in the interviews, like I am very curious to know, for somebody that is very much against the church, what would it take for that person to prove the church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to be Christ's true church on the earth? And if your feelings are against the church, my opinion is there's probably not going to be any evidence that's going to change your mind. Any scientific study, any archaeological evidence, you're going to find faults in all of that. And that's because it's meant to be that way. You put the book to test, you find a testimony, you apply those principles in your life, and then you will start seeing signs and evidence that might enrich your experience.
Yeah.
There is an order. There must be an order. But that works with all the commandments, works with the true divinity of Jesus Christ, with the existence of God the Father, with the actual power of the Holy Spirit to be a witness and a guide for you in your life. You kind of have to put those things to test. It's the supernatural world. It's understanding if there is a great purpose in life than just being born, live, and die. That's the question that has characterized humanity for millennia.
It is surprising, though, sometimes hearing a scientist come away from talking about haplogroups and talking about the particulars of science that even I barely understand, even as you're saying, and suddenly just find yourself saying faith.
Well, let me tell you something, okay? I teach biology in college, okay, to college students. And in the very first chapter of every biology science textbook, there is this great, we always start with the scientific method. How do you use science to test hypotheses and prove things or explain phenomenon in the natural world, right? The stars, the ocean, the flower, photosynthesis, the cellular respiration, everything, right? From the cellular level to the greatest wonder of the universe, we use the scientific method. And in that chapter, it says, look, the scientific method cannot answer all the questions. There are questions that have to use different standards. For example, questions related to morals, questions related to ethics, questions related to faith and religion cannot be measured with the scientific method. So you have to make a choice. Are you going to eliminate everything in your life that cannot be proven by the scientific method, meaning you're not going to have any morals or any ethics or any faith, any religion, just because that is falling outside of the scientific method? Or you're going to accept the fact, I got a coin here in my hand, all right? There is a coin. There are two sides of this coin. You cannot have a coin with just one side. You need to have both sides. On one side, there is some information. On the other side, there is some design. You can be science on one side and faith on the other side. In my opinion, you need both to explore all the dimensions and all the possibilities of why we're here on the earth. Scientific method, in my opinion, is one side, and the faith is on the other side of the medal or the coin. You need both of them.
When people, they get themselves compounded and the whole idea of proving that the church is not true becomes such white noise in their brain, it's more and more difficult to turn and look at the other side of the coin.
Yeah. And I don't want to discourage people to ask questions, to investigate, to wonder, even the controversies that might be surrounding, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, its history and doctrine. I'm not going to tell them do not pursue those questions. Those are legitimate questions. Through question, Joseph Smith had the first vision, right? We need to have questions. But on the other hand, let's make sure that those questions are not take precedence over our basic fundamental truth in our relationship with the divine.
That's an excellent point. Thank you, Ugo, for this opportunity.
All right.
You're full of a lot more energy than you were before you had your haircut.
Yes,
So
and my surgery.
probably a good idea that we talked about some of these things. I think it sinks in a little bit deeper.
Yeah, and I did one short from last time.
Yes. So, yeah, for those who didn't recognize, we have two separate interviews here on 2 different days because Ugo was very sick during that first interview. But we still, in spite of being on painkillers, came up with some great stuff.
Yeah.
So I so appreciate your time.
Yep. And you did a good job too, Chris. Those books you wrote, again, I mentioned that before. We love them. We love to listen to them, and they're inspiring to us. They're beautiful stories. I know they're fictional stories, but they are in such a beautiful Book of Mormon and a New Testament setting, and there are a lot of good morals and ethics and principles, a lot of faith, a lot of looking for answers, why is God letting certain things happen, and how at the end everything is going to work out. And I think you did a good job right there. I think you blessed the life of many youth through those books you wrote. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Ugo, take care of yourself.
All right.
And I hope we talk again soon.
I hope too. All right. Thank you, Chris.
All righty. Let me just end this interview by thanking everyone who's joined us and watched and taken an interest in this topic. And if you don't feel as close to the Lord today as you did yesterday, then ask yourself, who moved? We'll see you again next week.